Hey, so you probably got a Minilogue XD and you're probably wanting to make some of those big lush sounds from yesteryear like Van Halen's Jump and those lovely big oscillators that we can work with. So what I thought, we'll go through the Oberheim itself, do an analysis, see how we can apply it to the Minilogue XD and see what sort of sounds we can get out of it. So let's go over the Oberheim user panel and then see how we can apply it here. The master panel, like we have access to like volume, we can create our master tune, which we can menu dive for that one. Now the Minilogue auto tunes itself, so we don't have to rely on it, but we can also do shift and record to auto tune it again if one of the oscillators go out of phase or detunes itself. We have our octave up and down, so similar to the Oberheim. Control panel, so we had things like portamento, we had like unison, we had poly mode, we had chords, we had arpeggiators, which it's all condensed down to this little section here. We also got some functionality with this knob here, so changing up these voice modes, so that's really cool, which we can play with. Two oscillators that we can work with. Now the Oberheim, we had access to saw, square and triangle, but there was also a setting for square and saw, which would be a bit harder to mimic here. We can use the duo function for that, but we'll just stick to these oscillators for now. We can control the frequencies of both, but we have ours split into octaves and pitch, and on that we only had the dial for the Oberheim, so a bit more control there. We can use the shape knobs to control the pulse width modulation for the square waves, and we can also split them out by menu diving in here, so that's good. We can apply a sync to the oscillators so we can create some nice timbres and overtones like the Oberheim. And we can also control these variables by using the filter envelope as well, but we have to assign ours. We can't just take a direct feed and control it over here, so a bit limited, but we do have some functionality there. Next I want to go on to the filter itself. Now the Oberheim did have a 2-pole and a 4-pole filter, where we only really have a 2-pole filter on the Minilogue XD. Also the Oberheim only had like full and half for their mixer, but we have full control over our mixer, and we can also add some digital noise to add the noise functionality of the Oberheim. We only have the 2-pole filter, but we can drive the input signal here, which can create some interesting results. So I might see if we can use that, but we'll just stick to the 2-pole filter, which is nice and smooth. We have access to our keyboard tracking, so we can use that. And we can also control all these parameters using motion controls, and we can assign it as a part of the LFO or the envelope. So that's going to be interesting to play with. Now on the Oberheim, we did have a amplified envelope, and we had a filter envelope. Now we only have an AD envelope on the Minilogue, but we can assign it to whatever we want. It's not fixed to just the filter, so we have a bit more control where we're sending that signal around. And we have our full ADSR envelope like the Oberheim, so no problems there. We have our joystick, which we can assign Y plus and minus, so we can say we can assign the rate over here, so we can have like a vibrato, and we can control some other parameters in here. So we'll look in using that to add some extra modulation. However, on the Oberheim, this would actually be a secondary LFO that we can control. So pick some, you lose some. So one of the cool features on the Oberheim was their modulation panel, which was a section that had 3 LFOs that we could assign to different parameters around the Oberheim, which is really cool. I think that's what gave it a lot of its rich character and soul, plus its big oscillators. But how we can sort of mimic that here is we have our motion control, which, as you know, we've got 4 channels of modulating any of these parameters up here, so we can assign it wherever. So we'll talk about how we can try and get a looping sort of LFO in this modulation section. We don't have a sample and hold function, however we can sort of mimic that in the motion mode, so we'll talk about how we can set that up. We don't have a sine wave, but we do have our triangle wave, which is a close second. They could also do things as in reversing, like the saw up and inversing certain things. If you hold shift and then change the rate or the int, we can actually inverse this signal, so we can do that. We also have a CV in. Now if you have a modular, we can actually create an extra LFO using that, so we could have a look at that as well. One of the really cool features I find on the Oberheim, that it allowed each voice to be panned in a stereo field. So it was really on the side here, you'd had some potentiometers that you control. Now we can't do it directly on the Minilogue, so it only has all the voices come down to one signal and then it's passed through the effects. However, we can sort of mimic this when we record it, so we'll talk about how to apply that as well. And yeah, so that's really the functionality that we're going to look at today. So let's get into it. Now let's create a patch that we can work with on the Minilogue. Now the first thing that comes to mind with any Oberheim related sound is the Van Halen's Jump, which is quite a simple sound. So we'll set that up first. First thing, we're going to change this. So we go initialize patch. Cool. Next, it's really two saws that we're working with, so we're going to focus on the oscillator. So we're going to have one oscillator that's low, and we have one oscillator that's high, and they're both saw waves. And then we're going to make sure that they're both active on the mixer. Cool. Next, we're going to detune. We'll just stick with one, and it only needs a little bit, so that's almost there. And then what I'm going to do is on the amp envelope, we're just going to make sure that we have it active and pretty much want it to be all open except for like a tiny bit of release on the end. Like that. So mind my playing, we have so very simple sound. And then if we jump to a lower register, we have the probably a bit higher. Cool. So we can add a bit of drive to this sound to thicken it up, make it a bit bigger. So we've got and that's the basic Van Halen patch. So I want to go through a couple of other things as well. Now I was talking about the modulation on this being the key to the Oberheim being able to create those rich sounds. Now we do have our modulation section here. So we can do any of these parameters up here, but we'll stick to ones that we know the Oberheim had access to. So first off, we're going to give it a filter envelope. So we'll just make something simple. We've got a bit of attack, a little bit of decay. We'll give it some int, and then we drop the filter. Got the cool. So let's add some sample and hold onto the filter as well. Now with the Minilogue, we don't have like a function to control how much sample and hold is going through, so we sort of have to know what we're trying to do. So if we have this set halfway, we have this cut off adding on top. So compared to that, nothing, full. And then what that's doing is adding that amount onto this knob. So if we try and visualize what's going on, if we set that halfway, and then in our sample and hold function, we add that extra bit on top, we can modulate that sort of randomness onto the oscillator. So what we're going to do, we'll hit record. We'll go and twiddle the knob here. Now doing it this way will give us random voltages, or randomizing this. So what that's done is create like a sort of randomize moving the knob, but it's very static, so it'll jump to the next position. So if we hit play, that's going to loop through, and if we hit a note, and then what happens if we move the filter, we're getting more sample and hold because we're giving this more room to play with. But if we bring it up, we're adding less because we're sort of increasing the filter, and then on top we have the sample and hold that we're sort of crushing into the ceiling, so we're going to get less of that value. And that's just a nice trick to add some sample and hold to your patches. Next I want to add some modulation in here for only just the VCO2 shape. So we're going to add some pulse width modulation, which we could assign here. We could go menu diving, but I think it's just a bit quicker if I hit and start recording in here. So I just want to add a bit. If you tweak the knob like this in the record mode, it creates a smooth transition, and it sort of tries and blends here, but you've got to sort of be on point. So if we play that now, we can menu dive and go into the sequence here, and we can go, and we don't want to clear, we want to turn off one. So we've got that pulse width set up in here. So we can add some extras as well. We can go through and turn them on. If I go down one more, we can turn off the pulse width modulation. Now I'm going to just write this patch. So I'm just going to exit out of here. We'll write that. We'll go to a clean patch, because I want to talk about how we can sort of mimic the duo square or the square saw functionality on here. So we can just go oscillator 2, we have both of them turned on. There we go, we've got that square and saw, but like with the Oberheim we also had dual timbre going on, so we could have two sounds going on at once. So if we turn on duo, so it'll pop up, there we go. So it only gives us two notes to work with, but we can add some like big tune. We can also drop an octave for one. And it's just a nice way to layer up different sounds on the Minilogue. So on the Oberheim, on about here somewhere, we had the ability to change the panning for each voice on the system. So with the Minilogue, all the voices come together as one signal and then gets passed through the effects here. However, we can do a bit of TV magic here. So you probably heard that those were coming out of separate speakers or variants in between. So the way I did this was in post. Sneaky trick, I know, but what we can do is say we treat our MIDI, so we write our MIDI file with the chords that we want to play and that, and then what we do is we separate them into different MIDI tracks, and then we set that MIDI channel to record. So we've got one part of it being recorded straight from the Minilogue. So at the back I've got the MIDI set up, record one track, put it onto the computer, set the next track, record that track to the computer, vice versa, keep doing it. And then what we do on the DAW is we set the panning for each of those tracks. So we have all the different voicings at different bits, and then it gives us that stereo feel that's really cool with the Oberheim. So with all that learnt, let's try and make some really cool noises with this thing. So I hope that's giving you a bit of food for thought on how we can muck around with the XD here and make some really cool sounds. Now, each of these techniques don't have to be used just with the Oberheim. Feel free to muck around and see how you can apply them in whatever which way you want. Now, I've put a link in the description below where you can download those patches for free, so feel free to go grab them when you want. And the other part is, yeah, just have fun and make some really cool sounds. Now, if you do like these sort of videos, or you really want to see a certain synth where I go through and do the same thing, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And other than that, we'll see what next week's bring, and I'll see you next time.